Okay, so hello sir. Welcome to the Finance and Investment Sales podcast. It's an honor to have you with us. We'll just get started.
Sure. So today we have with us Mr. Vikram Kumar, a chartered accountant and an MBA from ISB, who has shifted his career dynamically from the field of finance to consulting, and we'll be talking around the same lines today. So the first thing to begin with, we went over your profile on LinkedIn, obviously, and the first thing we understood is you did your BCom from St. Xavier's, Kolkata, also known as the Kota factory of Kolkata and India. And then you went on to do your MBA at ISB. So could you tell us more about your education and your upbringing?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town called Jamshedpur, and which is also like the heartland of Tatas basically. And one thing which was always the focus there in academia, at least in Jamshedpur, it's always very science focused. It's always very engineering focused, right? Like, and you know, like when I reached 10th grade, I was given the same option, like do I do science or do I do commerce? Maybe 1 or 2 years before that, I'd already joined the rat race for IITs, right? In a sense, like, you know, starting to prepare a little bit. But then I think that also kind of opened my eyes into the sense that I'm not very sure if I really want to do science. Right? Most people in my family were like from the commerce background. My dad was a cost accountant. So, you know, I was like, okay, let me try commerce. I'm not very sure if I really want to join that particular rat race. Little did I know that rat races are not really optional here in life. But yeah, I mean, so basically I took the plunge to take commerce, like despite, you know, having good grades. And, you know, from there, I think it kind of, I just went with the flow because, you know, once you're done with 12th grade, you kind of figure out what kind of colleges you want to go to, etc. I wanted to stay close to home also. So St. Xavier's was the natural choice, right? I mean, believe it or not, I was not very sure if I really wanted to CA. I just wanted to like take things as they go and kind of have a more relaxed outlook to life. But you know, once I went to St. Xavier's, right, I saw that most people in campus do CA.
Right.
Like I did not even know about it back then. But like 90% of people in campus would do CA. If you're not doing CA, you are considered like, okay, like what are you doing in life, right? So, you know, I joined that also. I think CA was definitely very intimidating. I'm sure, like, since you guys are also doing a lot of professional courses, it was very intimidating. The pass rate was very low. I'm not sure what it's now, but it was definitely a challenge. Yeah. And I think that is what I approached it as. Like, this is probably something I can do meaningfully for the next 3-4 years of my life. And CA is basically a journey, right? It's fully structured in terms of, okay, there's 1 year, there's inters, and then there's articleship, and then you give finals and then you're done. Obviously, it is a question of whether it will work out or not. How quickly will you get done with it? But you know, we decided to take it as a challenge. I think it was a great community that brought us all together in terms of you know, us going all of us going to coaching together, going to the same classes. Basically, starting, you know, our classes used to start at 6 a.m. right? So I mean, you start off at 6 a.m. You go to coaching after that the whole day. And then by the time you're back home, it's like almost like 9, right? 9, 10. But it was a great community that brought us together, and I think that's what gave us a lot of learning in terms of, you know, what are the kind of, like, to really understand finance and accounts. I think it was a great eye-opener in that sense, and I would definitely never regret doing this course. But yeah.
That's amazing. So it's been a journey for you.
Yeah.
So to move on to, like, you were mentioning about CA and how that journey went.
Yeah.
So you did your articleship in Deloitte in Kolkata and then
Right.
went on to do Goldman Sachs in Bangalore.
Right.
So if you could talk about how your experience was just interviewing at those places at that time and
Right.
getting into the role and your
Right.
work experience there.
So I think one push that I had kind of understood earlier, and that was the craze, right? To go to a big four to do
Right.
your articleship. That was always the natural direction you wanted to go in. So I tried my luck, and I was lucky enough to get into Deloitte, right? What I definitely learned there is the difference in working style between an MNC or a big four compared to like one of the smaller articleship firms, right? And I think that's often overlooked, but there is definitely a boost, a premium that you're able to kind of build out in terms of skill sets. And I would also say, like, for most folks who are doing CA currently, right, I think it's a no-brainer to do industrial training, because articleship is a very long period.
True.
Right? And it's basically a quarter on quarter exercise.
Yeah.
Every quarter you do, say if you're an audit or even in taxation, right? It's a quarterly or a semi-annual or an annual exercise. While it's a great learning journey, right? You're definitely not prepared for what corporate life is going to throw at you. So it's always a great idea to kind of do industrial training as well. I was lucky enough to, there was an opportunity at Goldman at that time. Goldman had a very small scale industrial training program back then. It was not very large. It was just started maybe 3-4 years back. So I decided to apply, lucky enough to get into a division which was called like the services division, right? Which was more internal, which was less controllership, which is more towards FP&A.
Right.
So that was, I think, was a great stroke of luck in the sense that you really got to work with stakeholders globally and develop skill sets which I had probably never seen in Deloitte. Right? You learn to look at problems more analytically. You learn stakeholder management, which is a very different muscle from what you typically do in articleship, because this is not a client relationship. This is more of an internal global stakeholder relationship. So it was definitely a great experience. I think I was able to kind of complement some of the financial chops that I was able to build back in Deloitte, and kind of put that finishing touch, right, to make sure that you're able to seamlessly make that transition into corporate. One thing which of course I should point out is that I also had a concern, right? Like when you do industrial training, people always worry about CA finals. Hey, will I get enough time to kind of work on studies and make sure that I'm able to balance both responsibilities. See, the thing is that while nothing is easy, right? Like even if you are not doing articleship, even if you're not doing industrial training, finals are always difficult. But you should not at that particular age, at that particular stage in your career, you should never compromise on any learning opportunity that you're able to get. So definitely, I think industrial training is one line which I would definitely recommend.
So how is it balancing, like you mentioned, between your CA finals and your work at GS and
right.
all of that?
So no, definitely the folks at Goldman were very understanding, right? We got 2 months of leave before the exams itself.
Okay.
And I think the work-life balance was pretty good. I think they were very well aware of the fact that we are basically studying. We are due for a very major set of exams going for, in a few months, right? So they were very conscious about that. They were very accommodative as well. I'm not sure if every firm is like that or if every organization will be like that. But the idea is to kind of, even if it is not, right, the idea is to kind of make sure that you have that conversation with your manager, with your boss in order to kind of set your priorities straight and make sure that you're all on the same page. Mm-hmm. And in most organizations, they're happy to be able to work with you, right, in terms of making sure that you're able to give your best.
So you spoke about FP&A and controllership. Just for our viewers, could you tell us what FP&A is? I think it's financial planning and analysis, right?
Yes,
How is it different from controllership? Because many candidates think that FP&A and controllership, they're all the same thing, they're just accounts.
Right. No, I agree. So while controllership is more accounting focused, right, more in terms of financial reporting at the level of at least what we used to call as legal entity controllership, right? So basically there are multiple entities that a lot of these MNCs have, and you typically manage the books for a particular entity. But in terms of FP&A, right, it's a little bit more general. It's more towards business finance, right? In the sense that you work a lot more with stakeholders. Your priority is more on making sure that the business is able to plan its finances, its budgets, its forecast effectively, and make sure that business performance is not impacted. Right. So one of our key responsibilities often used to be able to forecast the budget for forecast the spend for the next month. Right. In terms of it's working with the vendors, getting estimates, and making sure that our difference or variances versus our forecast versus actuals is minimized, right? The variance should definitely be minimized, which will obviously help the business plan a lot better. So it is a little bit more dynamic. It is a little bit more stakeholder focused. It is it also involves a lot of modeling for sure, in terms of making sure that you're able to estimate spend a lot better. which I feel is quite different from controllership, which is more accounting heavy in terms of in which ledger would you account a particular transaction, for example.
So, sir, post your qualification, you also joined ITC.
Right.
So, if you could tell us about why the shift and how your experience was with that.
Sure. No, absolutely right. So I think the interesting part is that after I completed CA, I was given a PPO by Goldman as well to come back and continue. But ITC was also another opportunity that came in during campus placements, and I decided to take the plunge there because I felt like I wanted to try something different. Right, I'd worked. Goldman was a long journey; it was more than a year. So I had kind of learned a lot about how these MNCs operate, but I did not have a great idea about what how Indian companies approach financial reporting. Right, I had a little bit of sense at that time that I know a lot about IFRS, for example, but I'm not very sure about what are the Ind ASs that are applicable, at least in India. Right, I had a theoretical background, but I think the main thing that attracted me to ITC was the fact that ITC is one of those few companies which give you, team manager, team lead roles very early in your career. So I was a fresh 23-year-old kid who was on the block and just come into campus, come into ITC, and they're like, hey, here's your team of like 5-6 people, right, to manage. And some of the challenges that I faced there were quite interesting, which had nothing to do with finance, right? It was about the fact that I was managing a team with a median age of say 32, 35, right, which is like 10 years more than me. They had very different challenges. They were in a completely different trajectory in life, right? They were married, they had kids. I was just 23 years old, and my priorities were very different. I just wanted to learn, and I was in the mood to hustle, right, to be able to kind of deliver as much as possible.
Yeah.
So being able to kind of navigate that fine line of being able to push your team at the same time, make sure that you're able to be cognizant and be more empathetic towards their problems, their concerns, and of course their priorities. That is something I learned very early in my career, which I don't think a lot of organizations give you that opportunity. Some of my other colleagues were managing teams of like 10-15 people, right? So I think that was a great challenge that ITC gave us, and also not only from a team lead perspective, but also the fact that you are given responsibility which far exceed your age, right? You basically are the point person. At least I was the finance manager for financial reporting for one of the entities, which is more towards controllership maybe, along with taxation. So I was basically had a lot more say in and had a seat on the table in terms of a lot of finance discussions which are concerning the whole entity, right? Which is something, as an analyst, as an associate, for example, in most firms, you are typically just a cog in the wheel, right? But I think I really look back very favorably at my experience at ITC, where you are encouraged to kind of think a little bigger. You're given more responsibility than, and you're constantly challenged to kind of push your limits, right, in terms of being able to grow sustainably.
So wasn't it overwhelming at 23 to manage a whole team by your own?
No, absolutely. I think it's not just managing a team, right? You were just stepping into like proper full-time corporate life, right? So you are also kind of getting used to the fact that how do you manage a dynamic with your reporting manager, for example. How do you work with your peers effectively? Actually getting smart on the content of what you need to deliver. But yeah, definitely overwhelming. But I think we had a very strong support system. Our seniors were very helpful, were always very accommodative, because they had all been on that same journey, right? That is basically the rite of passage that I think everyone at ITC, at least in finance, typically goes through. So I think I never really felt there was a lack of sufficient support.
Coming to ISB, how did that happen? It's like a dream B school of so many students in our college.
Not even in our college, I think across
India,
the country.
country.
ISB is one of the places you want to be?
I think it was ranked the first best MBA college in India.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think currently it is the PGP
top.
program is the top.
So how did that happen? Because as a CA student, I mean, I don't think I can study more after I clear final, especially 1 or 2 years. That's a big commitment.
No, there is a little bit of color I can add to that, right? So, like you mentioned, right? I think in this generation, I've seen it a lot more that people just don't want to get boxed into anything.
Yeah.
They want to keep trying, and I think I used to feel that is probably a handicap that I have. That I always want to keep trying. I had a lot of curiosity in terms of learning new things, exploring new domains, building new skill sets, right? I mean, that's not something you typically expect from someone who does CA, because it's a very specialized and a very deep field.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think even while I was doing CA, I was very interested in kind of learning about international affairs, right? I mean, something I used to keep track of from college itself. I used to do a lot of model UNs back then. So, that's like, okay, I'm doing CA, but why can't I just go and do IFS, for example, someday, right? Why don't I go into UPSC? I think that is what stopped me, right? Like, the fact is that, hey, I think I have studied a lot. I mean, academically, my brain was fried back then. By the time I completed CA, so I'm like, maybe I'm not ready for something that deep already. But yeah, I mean, you never know, like, in the future what holds for you. But what I definitely had the sense that I had was that while finance is great, CA is great, I still had that curiosity, right? And one lens that I always took is in terms of something which one of my mentors at ITC taught me about, is that the way you kind of decide whether this career is for you or not is to kind of look at people who are 15 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line. And a lot of my bosses and a lot of the leadership in a lot of these companies that I worked in, right, I kind of used to have these kind of heart-to-heart conversations with them. Like, what does your life look like today, right? What keeps you up at night? What are your weekends like? What matters to you, right? Like, in terms of what is the kind of content you're spending your days in? What are you applying your mind on, right? And based on that, I used to think that, is this for me or not? So, if you go into finance, the ultimate goal is to become a CFO or something at the end of the day, right? Which is quite specialized again, which is very finance focused, which has a clear set of priorities in terms of what your clear priorities and responsibilities in terms of what you're supposed to deliver. And I at least for me, I realized that, hey, I want to look at something a little broader.
Yeah.
I want to look at something which is a little bit more strategic and a little bit more open-ended. So what happened is, the year that I qualified CA, the same year I applied for MBA. And ISB has this early entry program where you can apply ahead, you can get your admission secured beforehand, and then you can go ahead and get your 2 years of work ex wherever you could work, and then continue on to do your MBA. So that's what I did. I got my admit back in 2017, and I got to work confidently at ITC in the sense that I know that I'm not looking for the next job, right? I'm not worried about what my career is going to look like, and I kind of know where I'm headed from here. So that visibility of the path was something which also helped me kind of navigate a lot of the the intensity of the job that basically you can imagine at that time how it was, right? But yeah, I mean, I was due to join ISB in 2020, the same year the pandemic happened. Literally 10 days before we were told, the fact that, the admission, the starting date has been deferred, and there's going to be, they were switching to a hybrid mode, right? So
right.
there are not a lot of in-person classes. So understandably, everyone was on edge. Everyone was quite uncertain in terms of how it's going to look like, because people literally, it's your dream come true to be able to go to an MBA campus, and especially for folks like us, like who didn't really have a full college life.
Yeah.
We didn't have a well-rounded residential program as such, the way folks in engineering typically do. So I mean, I had high hopes, right? So I don't know, for whatever reason, I decided to defer at that time. I deferred my course by 1 year. So that is actually, there's a little bit of interlude before what happened at ISB, right? So I worked with this. I had met one mentor of mine who I had done an internship with back in college, and he reached out to me and he's like, what are you doing? What are you doing with this 1 year off that you have, right, between courses? And I was like, I don't know. I had already left ITC back then because that was way before COVID happened.
Yeah.
So we decided to kind of set up this venture called FinValence, right? And I think it was the best of both worlds in terms of the fact that this mentor of mine, he was very analytical. He was basically like a CS grad. He had done his MBA as well from the US, and he was a serial entrepreneur. Had set up a bunch of startups over the years. And I kind of my curiosity was just not satisfied yet. I was like, I never done a startup thing. I had a lot of friends who had set up ventures back then, but I never really had a taste of entrepreneurship. And I was not very sure of if I'm immediately going to start a venture right after MBA, right?
Yeah.
Where I had a different sort of trajectory in mind. So I decided to take the plunge into entrepreneurship during that 1 year. It was a venture we basically set up which kind of combined finance and analytics in the best way possible, and we worked with a lot of startups in India, also in the US, where we kind of helped set up their analytics functions. We helped them kind of set up their finance functions as well. It was a great learning journey for me because it was all about actually what it takes to set up a venture from scratch while having the comfort, the comfort of having a mentor to guide your way also, right? But it was a great learning experience. I picked up a lot of skill sets. One of the I think coolest things that I remember from then is there was one requirement in which we had to analyze like a huge bunch of data, right? Like which one of the startups had shared with us. And me being my typical CA mind, I'm like, I have Excel, I'll do it in that. He laughed at it and he's like, Excel only has 1 million rows.
Only 1 million rows.
Yeah, so only 1 million rows, right? So your data set is like whatever 10 million or something like that. So I'm like, I was at a loss, like I don't know. I'm like, if it won't fit in Excel, then I don't know what to do. So he mentioned that so he kind of also helped. He was of a similar mindset as me, right? Where we never draw any boundaries in terms of where learning exactly stops.
Yeah.
So he encouraged me to kind of learn this coding language called R, right? So I just took up a course. It was COVID, right? There's nothing else to do at home. So I took up the course. I learned R in a month, and then started coding my way through that. Started to run R scripts. It's something even he didn't know about. He didn't know what R is. Like he knew other coding language. He didn't know R. So I'm like, ठीक है, I'll learn it. He also encouraged me to learn SQL as well. So these are skill sets that I picked up which had nothing to do with finance. But what I'm trying to highlight is the fact that you should never shy away from any opportunity to learn a new skill set, because none of it is rocket science, right? Ultimately, there are thousands of people who learn it. Just because you're in the finance track doesn't mean you should not do that. So that's one of the examples. But there were a lot of there was a very steep learning curve, and navigating client relationships when you're basically the equivalent of a partner, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, like you're working in Deloitte, right? So you're the equivalent of the partner, you're the client relationship owner. So that was a completely new muscle that I had to build from scratch. But yeah, it was a great learning experience for about 1.5 years before I finally headed to ISB.
So if you could tell us a little about how your ISB experience was.
Right.
So at this point, you've worked in, like he mentioned, major of the companies that people
Right.
aspire to be, and you've also had an entrepreneurial curve.
Mm-hmm.
Post that, how was ISB? Like, how was meeting people from across backgrounds, and how did things go from there?
Absolutely. I think a lot of my friends from finance and CAs would agree with me when I say that when you finally go to B school, right, you are opened up to a very vast world out there of people who come from all paths, right? Like we had people from engineering, we had people from humanities, we had folks who had done their engineering in the US and then come back here and then done their MBA here. We had folks from the army, we had people from the Navy, from the Air Force. And also we had people from other international campuses as well for exchange programs. So it is a melting pot of people who have come from very, very different kinds of careers from you, who literally speak a different language compared to you, right? Where you look at everything in the your language is debit and credit, right? Basically, it is that. Basically, it is finance. If you don't have a balance sheet in front of you, you're not happy, right? But the ability to be able to look beyond that, to be able to look at what marketing is all about, what organizational behavior is all about, and it's not just something which is one of the subjects that just exist in your course, right? Like, I mean, a lot of folks back when we used to do CA, we had professional ethics as one of the courses. It is something which you definitely learned, you definitely took a lot of seriously, but you felt your core is only finance, accounts, audit, costing, etc. But I think MBA also gives you the opportunity to kind of give equal priority to all kinds of topics, because the kind of careers that we typically proceed to post MBA, whether it's consulting, whether it's product management, whether it is strategy or founder's office, right? There is no particular sort of there is no one Bible in terms of content that you should know of. There's no one book that holds all the frameworks, right? So you need to kind of make sure that you understand different kinds of ways of thinking, develop more empathy with your colleagues, with your leadership, with your juniors, for example, and definitely have a little bit a wider mindset. And I think for folks who come from finance, it's definitely an eye-opening sort of journey. But, yeah.
Clearly, ISB was worth it. I mean, you are now in consulting, another field that many of us hope to be in one day.
Right. Absolutely.
So how was your consulting again came up as a post MBA thing? So
Right.
how was your what was your mindset going into, say, your placements at ISB?
Right.
Were you aiming for a consulting job, or did it come to you and you was, let's do it?
No, absolutely. I think so. Consulting is something I had a sense of back when I applied to ISB, right? Because the reason I applied to ISB is because it's one of the best schools if you want to get into consulting specifically. So I mean, basically, as I mentioned, like my curiosity always drove me to kind of explore a little bit more, and I felt that kind of a nomadic mindset best fits in a consulting sort of environment, right?
So you just explained about how your ISB journey was.
Right.
So did you have a preset thing that you wanted to get into consulting, or just did consulting come and you took it as an opportunity?
Right. No, absolutely. It's a good question, right? I mean, a lot of folks who typically come into MBA, they don't really think that, I'm going to go for consulting for sure, because there are a lot of options out there. You have product management, you have consulting, you have general management as well. A lot of folks go into founders office, strategy, etc. At least for me, I mean, I had kind of my eyes set on consulting a little earlier on, considering the fact that I wanted to continue to feed my curiosity. I wanted to explore more domains, work with different kinds of people, continue that journey that I had been on. So yeah, I mean, I think at least for me, my first preference was always consulting, and I was definitely very happy the way it turned out well. But in terms of ISB, right, it's or in any B school for that matter, the idea is to be able to kind of experience the journey and not as a means to an end, as a means to a good placement, right? While that is the ultimate goal, of course, but the idea is to kind of make sure that you're able to build out those networks as well, in terms of making good friends, folks whom you can call on later in your life. And to be honest, I mean, it's very true, right? I mean, if the further you go down your career, the more you realize that having that Rolodex of trustworthy people whom you have known for a long time for sure, who are in kind of probably similar positions in their career, definitely comes in handy quite often. So, as basically just to summarize what I would say is that MBA is not about just going to getting your dream job, whichever that might be. It's more of a journey. It's more of a process to make sure that you're able to kind of mark a very pivotal shift in your career.
So did CA at all help you in consulting? I mean, how was it different post CA during your articleship?
Right.
how was what you did during your CA days different to consulting, and did it help you at all?
Okay. So, I mean, backing up a bit, like CA definitely had a great advantage in MBA at least in for a few subjects, right? We do have financial accounting, we do have valuation, M&A, etc. We have topics on all this. So it's always, in these kind of subjects, finance students, folks with the finance background definitely always had an edge, right? So those are the subjects where I used to have an edge. So, you definitely feel thankful at that time that there are at least a few subjects I don't have to worry too much about. While you try to figure out more complicated subjects like operations, for example, right? Which something which engineers often have an advantage in. But yeah, I mean, in consulting, consulting is such that there is no one particular track in consulting, right? I mean, the kind of projects that you typically do, the kind of problem statements that you're given, they usually don't have anything to do with your background. While you can definitely solve for it, while you can definitely say that, hey, I want to work in the financial services sector because that is my prior background. But that's not the norm for sure. In terms of an advantage, I think yes, for sure. I mean, you always have an edge in anything that's to do with Excel. That's I think that goes without saying, right? I mean,
I think the key is
you will know the shortcuts which most people don't know about, and that's something which is always fun, and that's a great way to be able to share a few skills with folks while you also learn other skills from folks, right? But projects which require a lot of financial modeling, for example, of which there are a lot, right? Most strategy projects or a blueprinting project will typically have like a financial model built in. Managing that at scale without and being able to build that out within a matter of hours rather than days, right, is something which perhaps folks from a finance background will have a little bit of an edge in. But that edge only lasts for maybe a year, right? Because most people, so in consulting the learning curve is very steep, right? So if within a year, I think it all equalizes in the sense that you move on to the next set of skills that you want to build out on, and the advantages maybe you might have had temporarily for the initial maybe 1 year, so those kind of even out.
So I'm pretty sure that you go through a lot of decks, a lot of pitch decks that you're getting for your day-to-day work.
Right.
And I'm sure you're exploring a lot of sectors also.
Right.
So could you tell us about a few sectors that you think are at its peak right now and you think are at its growth stage that
Right.
would be reaching peak in a few years?
Right. Well, that's a good question, right? I think at least my sense is that everyone knows, like even if you type in what are the best hottest sectors to get in ChatGPT, you'll get a list of 5 segments which properly whilst I've added with facts. At least from my personal experience, one thing I've discovered while going deep into a lot of sectors which maybe are not the most talked about sectors, you definitely find that there are a lot of diamonds in the rough, right? There are a lot of segments, a lot of industries which might look a little boring from the outside, but are definitely places where there's a lot of innovation happening. There are great people to work with. There's a lot of investment coming in, and those are basically the white spaces that you would definitely want to target, right? So in terms of maybe skill sets from a student's perspective, like if I were in your shoes maybe a few years earlier, I would definitely first look at Gen AI and building out skill sets in those fronts, because the applications are endless, right? I mean, that is something you cannot go wrong with. I mean, I don't think there is anything wrong with doing that, although everyone is doing that. That's the norm.
Yeah.
But in terms of industries to enter, right? Like what I would say is that don't go for the conventional 2-3 industries which everyone ultimately goes to, right? I mean, try to think beyond that. Try to think about industries and businesses where you feel genuinely interested, right? Where you feel a little bit of a pull. This is something which probably mentors told me about way back. Like, find the space where you feel you belong, And we used to take that with a pinch of salt, and it's like, I mean, you're in that mindset, right? I mean, as long as I'm getting the right kind of compensation, I don't mind doing whether it's automotives, whether it is tech, whether it is I don't know, food, for example. It doesn't matter, but it does matter. It does matter in the sense that the extra mile that you go to be able to kind of build out your knowledge or skill set in a sector that you genuinely like is definitely well worth it, and will definitely help you succeed in your career as well. In terms of what are those sectors, right? I mean, your original question. One thing which I found very interesting and which I feel has a lot of growth potential in is actually consumer wellness. Right? Consumer wellness, consumer foods. It was dismissed off as like something which is a fad or something which probably will not have the legs to kind of really evolve into something long term. But there definitely seems to be a major shift in the traction that these kind of segments are getting. There are a lot of startups out there already in terms of helping people kind of on their journey of health and wellness, right? It's a sector that I had studied well. I feel there's a lot of potential in it. I personally feel quite thrilled to be, to get to work in that kind of a sector, right? A few of the kind of studies that we have worked on as well. That is one for sure. The other one would be, fintech, right? But fintech which is not only applied to like in the conventional sense, like I would say fintech not in the sense of like say a PayPal or a Paytm or a Google Pay for that matter, right? Fintech in the sense of being able to build out the infrastructure behind it, the back-end infrastructure, the kind of payment gateways of the world, the folks who make sure that your transactions are unsniffed, are protected and secure. I think the world is really evolving in that direction where cyber security and safety of transaction, safety of your wealth has become a major factor to keep in mind. It's important to make sure that you kind of you have your finger on the pulse of what are the emerging megatrends that are kind of that the world is currently evolving in it. Right? I mean, if you read the newspaper for the last 3-4 months, you will feel that probably defense tech is the most important sector to get into, because clearly everyone is everyone we know more about Rafales and F-35s, etc. now more than we used to maybe 6 months back. These things obviously come with their own ups and downs, but the idea is to make sure that something is supported by megatrends, something has the legs to be able to sustain a career for the next 10-15 years, and the skill sets that go behind it. And the second one is also about whether you have a personal pull or a tug to get into that kind of sector, to get into that space. Where do you follow these companies on your own without having to study it in an assignment, for example? Do you keep track of what is the latest innovations happening in that space, even without being asked to do? If that is happening, that's your signal, right? To make sure to kind of follow your heart in terms of what is the particular kind of segment or career that you really want to build.
So I think a key, like from takeaway at least for me, is to understand your interest first within the industry rather than, like you said, going with what is paying you the most.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So could you explain about how a consulting project works from the point where a client comes to you till your last delivery?
Right. So typically how it works in consulting is what we do typically is a lot of strategy consulting. And strategy consulting is typically quite fast-paced and a little relatively shorter, right, than maybe like a technology consulting piece or like an operations transformation. Strategy consulting typical phases are maybe 1 or 2 months max. So it's more of an 8-week sort of sprint in which you're able to kind of go from understanding the problem statement to finally delivering what the client asks for. Obviously, it could be anything. So there are different kinds of strategy assignments. There could be something which could be around M&A strategy. There could be something around growth strategy. There could be something around profitability strategy to be able to kind of turn EBITDA positive within say a certain kind of time frame. So the problem statements are diverse, which is what is quite interesting for a lot of people, where you never know what is the next problem statement that you will get, right? From over a matter of say 1 year, you would probably go from all the way from automotives to technology to consumer wellness to agriculture to chemicals. So there is absolutely no sort of connection in terms of domain, at least in the initial 1 or 2 years.
I think that's also continuous learning, because you will also have to be up to date with each of the projects.
Exactly, right. So
but every client is the same, right? How do you...
Sorry?
Like not every client is the same, right? You have to keep upgrading yourself.
You have to upgrade yourself, and I think the most important thing is something which is often overlooked, right? Is that you have a very short space of time, short span of time, to be able to kind of go from 0 to 10. You probably will never reach 100, right? But you need to be able to speak the same language as your clients. The kind of terminology that they talk about, the industry terminology that goes in there, to be able to understand how the market exactly works in India, in the markets that they are interested in, to understand the dynamics of demand and supply that currently operate there, who are the main, what does the competitive landscape look like, who are the top 5 companies, who are the next 5 challengers. You need to have that perspective to be able to enter any sort of a strategy meeting, right? That especially that if you're having with a client. So that is what is that's something which is quite challenging maybe in the initial first or second study, but then you are kind of try to build out a playbook as well in terms of what are the 5 things that I need to know before you're able to kind of go toe to toe with people who have spent maybe 10, 15, 20 years in these segments. It's also important to ensure that you still have that humility also, right? In terms of making sure that you learn from the clients as well. You work with them to be able to understand the nuances of that particular industry, that particular kind of problem statement that you're working on, and which is what which is what draws me a lot towards consulting in general, because the ability to be able to absorb a lot of information very quickly and to be able to hold a conversation with someone who has decades of experience in that particular segment. I mean, obviously, even if you're able to hold a 2-minute, 5-minute conversation with someone with that much experience, it definitely speaks a lot about the kind of learning toolkit that you're able to develop, right? And that's what a lot of consulting firms focus on as well. You don't focus on learning the ins and outs of a particular domain. You learn a consulting toolkit which is about how do you replicate that same sort of flow and the approach of getting smart on a new domain and be able to kind of deliver impact to the client by the end of it. And how do you replicate that and you do it, you rinse and repeat every single time. And that is the main skill set that you really develop within as part of your consulting toolkit. And yeah, I mean that is I think why that's why a lot of people want to get into consulting. That's why a lot of firms also want to hire folks who come from consulting, right? Because it's not really about have you worked in that sector extensively. It's about whether you're able to succeed as a consultant, as if you're able to build out a proper toolkit as a consultant and be able to replicate that in any other future career opportunity that you might have been into.
So if you would like to go a little more into detail on how your toolkit is, like you said, so there's no one fit box, right? So today you might be working on agriculture and next month you'll be working on, say, healthcare.
Right.
So how do you go from agriculture to healthcare in 1 month,
Right.
and what does your research process look like?
Absolutely, that's a great question, right? So in terms of a research process, while I think before ChatGPT came out, for example, it used to be a little bit different, right? I mean, we do have a lot of resources that these consulting firms often provide. You read about industry reports, you try to learn more about who are the main competitors in that sector, who are the major players. You understand the demand and supply dynamics. What is the total market demand? What is the total supply for that particular product? What does the regulatory landscape look like? What are the recent developments that have happened? What does the next 5 years look like, right? Like what are folks in the industry really passionate about? What are they gearing towards? So it is a research process that, I mean, it could be structured, it could be unstructured, depending on the kind of industry that you're getting into. Right? A lot of industries are very fragmented, so I mean, it will be difficult for you to find out who are the top 10 competitors.
Yeah.
But the idea is to make sure that you have your bases covered for sure. I think LLMs now definitely simplify the process a lot for you. While of course it might not be fully reliable, and you should obviously do research. You should at least one thing which I typically do, and maybe it comes from the fact that I started consulting a little before ChatGPT came back, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you always have that little bit of concern about whether the LLM is hallucinating, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I don't know if it's 10, if it's 100, I don't know. And you have to be sure about your facts. One of the most important things is that you need to be able to build credibility in consulting, because you are entering a field which you don't have a lot of experience in a particular domain, for example, right? You may not, but that's not what is at stake. So you definitely have to build credibility. So to be able to make sure that your research is bulletproof, you need to, if your LLM tells you that, hey, these are the 5 things you need to know, these are the top 5 players, you should kind of you should audit the links.
Yeah.
Right? Like in an Excel, how you audit the formula, like every time. You should audit the links, you should check what are the sources, you should actually read the underlying document from where all of that information was passed, to be able to make sure that you have a well-rounded understanding of that sector, and not just something which an LLM spat out to you. And so 1 minute is not enough. While it looks easy, it definitely takes a lot more time. You should take your time to be able to do the proper diligence, do the proper investigation in terms of what are the 5 things you need to know. And while it can definitely help, it's not enough. You should put in the hours for sure.
So the real question is, I mean, there's many jokes about this, but is consulting really increasing revenue and decreasing costs?
I mean, yeah, it's one of the frameworks for sure, but I think it's a lot more than that, right? It's like I mentioned, it's about being able to bring the particular kind of toolkit that you have developed, that your team has developed, to be able to give more of an outside-in perspective on whatever is the problem statement that the organization or the client gives to you, right? One thing which I'm sure you would also be aware, but like, say for example, you have probably 5 years of experience or 10 years experience in a topic, right? And you have folks who come into that particular, into that domain and have a very different way of approaching it. They'll be like, hey, so if you are trying to coach them, you'll probably say, hey, this is not how we used to do it. We typically used to use this approach. This is the old school approach. And folks, who enter the subject, they'll be like, hey, this is not my priority. I want my objective function is completely different, right? So I have a very different way of approach. I think this is more efficient. So then you also learn a lot. There are a lot of blind spots that a lot of folks within an industry would definitely have. Maybe I have that in consulting now, right? But the latest batch of consultants have a very different perspective for sure. So, having that outside-in perspective, which is more, which looks at your problem statement as a whole, which looks at other players in the industry as well, not just your client. Right? If you work in a particular company, you know everything about that company, but you may not have that much of perspective on what other competitors are doing. I mean, you'll probably know it through like in competitive intelligence or colleagues or friends working in that sector, but you don't have a structured approach of how to look at it as a whole. So that is something which consultants often bring to the table, right? That kind of strategy muscle of looking at an industry as a whole and building a perspective, and then being able to kind of share some insights on where exactly would you fit in, and what are the kind of priorities that you should probably work on given your capabilities, given your current endowments, where exactly you will be able to make the most value. So, I mean, for sure, you probably will never know as much about the client as they do themselves. But there is a different perspective that you can bring in, which is basically, they say the metaphor is fresh blood, right? Like fresh thinking. So bringing that fresh thinking into that mix definitely helps you enable value. But ultimately, to your point, increasing revenue and decreasing costs is is when you're trying to solve a profitability function, right? But if you're trying to solve something as what is a succession plan for a family-run company, that really has nothing to do with that particular function.
Yeah.
There is a lot of depth that goes into understanding the problem statement, understanding what exactly your client stakeholders require, and to be able to define a sort of objective function which would be able to help achieve those particular goals. So yeah, it's a little broader than that.
I think that also busts the myth that consulting is just increasing revenue and decreasing costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were talking about how you were walking us through how a client process works. So how does a day in a consultant's life look when you're peak project?
Right. Okay, I think you are always on peak project basically. Whenever you're on a project, like I mentioned, we have very, at least in strategy consulting, it's quite short cycle, right? So you typically get to an answer within, say, 6 to 8 weeks, which is not a lot of time if you really think about it, right? Considering it also includes the time you need to be able to do research and get smart on that topic. But in terms of a typical week, if I were to say, I mean, we typically have in a lot of these strategy assignments, we have steer course every week, right? Where you basically check in with the client in terms of how things are going, where do we need help, what is our current analysis telling you about our understanding of the topic, what are the next steps ahead. And so every week often it kind of anchors to that particular steer course discussion, right? In terms of what is the kind of progress we want to show this week, what are the 3-4 analysis we want to drive, and what do we need to be able to drive that kind of analysis. In terms of what a day-to-day looks like, I have probably and most consultants have probably the worst case of Monday blues, right? Where our Mondays typically start at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and you need to catch a flight to be able to get to the city where you are working on time at say 9-10 a.m. So you have to wake up early and could take that 2-hour drive to the Bangalore airport to be able to kind of make sure that you don't miss your flight. And that is something you do week in and week out every single week. While definitely it's a little bit challenging on sleep schedules, for example. But it's also quite a lot of fun as well, right? Because it keeps a lot of that dynamism going. You typically you'd go into the day you fly in, typically you kind of have a lot of alignment calls in terms of what are your priorities for the week. You basically have these problem solving sessions with the leaders in terms of what are the 3-4 analysis I want to run, what is the support that I need, and then basically you spend most of the time after that running those analysis, working with clients, having these discussions with say experts whom you often have to rely on to get those kind of differentiated insights. And that's how it typically goes to all the way towards Tiaku. But at least if you look at in terms of evenings, we typically retire to the hotel by around 7-8 or something depending on traffic, and you have dinner and then you continue working for a couple of hours more, right? So I think one thing which is quite underappreciated and something which is not very well known about consulting is the fact that it is very flexible. It is not about being in office at a certain time, leaving office at a certain time, unless their client, the system is like that. But it's all about getting to that answer in the most efficient way possible. And at least most consulting firms are very flexible about individual sort of preferences, styles of working. Something which is often asked about, when we have these kind of initial team meetings, because every time you work with a different team as well. So I probably work with you in this project, not with you in the next project. So you need to get to know people in your team very well as well. So one thing which often we talk about is that, are you a morning person or are you a night person? Do you wake up early in the morning and work, or do you want to work late night, right? So, and the team kind of works around that, so, and can tries to accommodate that. A lot of folks have stuff like I need 1 hour every day to be able to work out and follow my gym routine. So that's something called as a blackout hour. So that's something which the team makes concessions for. It accommodates your working style as well. So it's very flexible. It's very cognizant of the fact that people fly in from all over the country to be able to spend that one working week together, right? And typically after the steerco happens, we all obviously have a lot of the pressure or the stress definitely dissipates by then, and you kind of look forward towards the weekend. You probably fly back the same day to your base location, or you typically have something like a team event as well once in a while, where you do something fun, like probably go play laser tag or go to an escape room or something like that. And the idea is to be able to build that camaraderie, right, within the team, because every time the team changes. In a typical job, you work with colleagues for like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? And you kind of figure out these things on your own in terms of what your cycles are like. But the team works the best if there is enough camaraderie, there's enough, if the morale is high, if folks are excited to continue working on this kind of project week in and week out. So, all consulting firms typically do a lot to be able to solve for that, to be able to keep that excitement up, to give you opportunities to kind of get to know your team better, apart from just their working style, but also their personal life, about their interests, their hobbies, their goals and ambitions. So that is something which is great, right? If you are a person who loves to meet a lot of people, work with different kinds of people, learn from working styles of different kinds of peers and leaders. So consulting is a great opportunity to do that, because I don't think where many jobs offer that kind of an opportunity or the flexibility to be able to do that.
I think that's why consulting is also one of the most sought after places to be, because
right.
Especially from a finance student's perspective, from just the internships I have done, it's not a very flexible thing. Like
right.
you are expected to be at office for a certain number of hours,
right.
and consulting doesn't box you up in that way.
So that is when I think those a lot of those memes come on of please fix, right? I mean, it's a meme for sure. But what I'm trying to highlight is the fact that it also speaks about the flexibility that you often have.
Yeah.
So you might be working at a hotel bar, but the fact that you're not in office and you're in a hotel bar means that you're being given that much of flexibility. And if you're able to kind of work effectively there, then more power to you. So.
Yeah, so it's been a great conversation with you. So as we conclude, my last question would be, what would you suggest college students like us who want to be in consulting in the future start doing at this age? It might be skills, certifications if you think they're any worth it, experiences that we should have.
Right.
Also, many of these big firm roles are not very approachable to undergraduate students.
Right.
So for a person who would like to be in that place in the future, what does a roadmap typically look like, and what can we do to, get that job in the future?
Right. No, absolutely good questions, right? So in terms of getting into consulting, while like I mentioned, right, there's no set rule. So it depends on what side of these firms you typically want to be in. But if you really want to get into like integrative consulting, there are like multitudes of opportunities, right? I mean, I personally know of like people who have literally like just very specifically very technical engineers, right, in a particular field, who are often recruited to be able to kind of build out our capabilities in particular sort of very niche sort of technical subjects as well. So I mean, while the conventional wisdom goes that typically you go for an MBA from one of these kind of from particular schools to be able to get into these firms, at least what I've been seeing is that the landscape is changing there as well, right? So I think the value is placed on the kind of expertise that you bring in, right? How do you push the answer forward? How are you of any value to a particular client, right? So that could be in terms of from a very integrative sort of a generalist sort of mindset, which typically folks from MBA have. There are also like expert tracks in the sense where people have a lot of good experience in a very particular sort of domain. whether that is retail, whether that is e-commerce, whether that is whether that is something very technical like chemicals, right? So at least what I know is a lot of firms do hire such folks as well. So the idea is to be able to, whichever firm that you do want to enter into, right, you should definitely study that a lot more in terms of A, what are the kind of openings they have, B, from a LinkedIn search, right, like who are the kind of people who work there, and try to find people who have probably reached there from the path that you have chosen.
Right.
Now, for example, like if you have done CFA, then try to find people who have done CFA and entered there. That will give you a lot of guidance in terms of what is the kind of success rate of each kind of path. I mean, of course, if you want to, if there is a one size fits all sort of approach, your best bet could probably be doing an MBA in one of these kind of schools, which would probably increase your chances of conversion. To obviously never guarantee it, because even if you're at ISB, right, like at least the way we used to approach placements was, hey, there is MBB consulting firms right at the top, and then there are other firms as well, and then there is non-consulting domain. So there is product management, there is general management, there is strategy, there's founder's office, there's operations. So basically the idea that I wanted to kind of highlight is the fact that even when you are in an in a B school campus, right, having paid whatever fees that they charge, which can be quite a lot sometimes, there is no guarantee that you will end up in a particular place. So the idea is to be able to kind of hedge your bets, to have a plan A, plan B, plan C in terms of what are the different ways to reach consulting, or if not consulting, what else do you want to do. And there's also no particular sort of an age to enter consulting, right? I mean, firms have become a lot more flexible now in terms of how they approach hiring. So we do have people, like I know of folks who have joined consulting firms after spending 2-3 years in a startup, like probably in a growth sort of in a growth role or a product management role, right? And who have entered a specific kind of domain of expertise, and then there is a journey that they often make towards making the switch towards front-end integrative consulting as well. So my thoughts here are the fact that don't anchor yourself to only one path if you want to get into consulting. And I think the second thing is probably before you enter consulting, just try to talk to people who have been in that space, people who have built their entire career in that space, people who have exited after say 2 years, right, and try to build a perspective on their motivations, their priorities, their journeys as well. I can share my journey, but my journey is one of say millions of journeys, right, of the ways in which people have been able to get into this space. So there is no one size fits all approach. There are things you could do to kind of improve your odds, perhaps. From a college perspective, what I can definitely say is it's not just about a CATS, right? I mean, if you the way a typical consulting firm looks at your resume is typically around 3 lines. So there's your CATS, there is your work experience, and then there's your extracurriculars as well. Something which at least folks from the finance background spend a lot more time on the CATS functional part of it, and probably not so much on extracurriculars. But the idea is to make sure that you build a balanced profile. And even the extracurriculars that people do, right, it should not just be something you do just to probably add a line in your resume. It should be about doing something meaningful, something you're passionate about, and something which probably fits in with your personality as well, right? Say for example, you're very passionate about the environment, right? So you want to do your part to be able to kind of improve sustainability. So do something on that lens. If you feel that you want to work for more social causes, then do something along that lens. Don't take that approach of hey, this would look much better on my resume than that, right? So because I mean, most firms are able to kind of piece it together, because you have your resume and then you have an interview as well. Your interview will often include topics on extracurriculars, for example, like hey, this looks pretty interesting, like tell me more about why you got into this, or tell me more about this one project that you led in terms of social or impact work. So they're able to kind of sniff out something which is very disingenuous. So my at least my push would be that try to build out a very balanced profile. Try to make sure that in terms of acads you have something to be able to kind of showcase, whether it's a professional degree that you have done, whether it's say some sort of a specialized degree that you have done. In terms of work ex, make sure that it is meaningful. Make sure you're able to kind of get into roles which have a good learning trajectory, which is which shows how you've been able to develop your skill sets in a particular sort of domain. And in terms of extracurriculars, make sure that whatever you're doing is meaningful, it is impactful, and it kind of also it's something which is not something like a resume filler, which is something which you're genuinely passionate about. And in terms of other skill sets, right? I mean, consulting typically does not really look for anything very particular, like do you know skill set A versus skill set B. A lot of anything that you have is usually a good to have, but what you do need to have is more of a problem solving or an analytical mindset, which is something which can be developed. It's not necessarily something you're born with. The fact that consulting firms hire folks like doctors, lawyers, Olympic athletes as well, right? I mean, that clearly says that it does not matter that if you have a CFA versus you are a state level badminton player. You can't compare these two. But the idea is the fact that whatever you're doing, you are able to kind of show some sort of spike in it, right? The fact that whatever you do it well because you're passionate about it, right? That is the kind of lens that typically firms look for. There are obviously a lot more other things to be kept in mind, but the idea is to make sure that you're able to kind of showcase your passions, showcase your capabilities, and show your growth trajectory in terms of building your skill sets out right from school all the way to your last job. The fact that even in school, like what are the kind of activities you used to do, what are the kind of leadership positions that you have taken, right? These are all kind of clues to kind of inform your career trajectory as well, which is why consulting firms more than most other firms, right? More than an investment bank, more than a startup or a product manager role. That is why they look for clues across your profile and not just whether you have one or two skill sets. But yeah, that would be my thoughts.
So they look at you holistically as a person and not just for your skills or your degree or
exactly.
your experience.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that was some great thoughts to keep in mind and let it sit, so we could also start building a more holistic profile, like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure having you with us today. I hope you had a good conversation with us, and thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.